This is another massive aspect of what connects into the pandemic hoax, the climate change hoax. It's being perpetrated by exactly the same networks and exactly the same cult to exactly the same end. So when you look at what the climate cultists say must happen, how the world must change to save the world from climate change, it mirrors what they say must happen to save the world from. They're running the same scam. And so you've got two hoaxes, both of them run by selling a perception of something that isn't actually happening. And human-caused climate change. And again, what we're now seeing, it was so predictable, is the climate change networks, the cult, are now coming out and saying this great reset has to happen to save the world from climate change as well. They're all fundamentally connected. So you've got Al Gore, the high priest of climate change, and the UN Secretary General demanding a great reset of global capitalism. This is the transformation of the financial system to save the world from climate change, and the opportunity, they say, is provided by the pandemic hoax. And so you have the Club of Rome coming out and demanding a planetary emergency plan to save the world from climate change at this time of the pandemic. And there's the Club of Rome, one of the cusp organizations of the cult global network. So climate change and the pandemic are fundamentally connected and perpetrated by the same people. And again, the climate cult, woke foot soldiers of the 1%. They're all connected to the 1%. And organizations like Extinction Rebellion seem to be obsessed with death. And what they're demanding too is a Marxist society, which is what the cult want. And you see this occult symbol with the snake eating its own tail and the timer, the sand timer in the middle, time running out. And then you have the Extinction Rebellion symbol, which is the same, basically. And when you see the obsession that this cult has with symbolism, for reasons I've talked about, that's no accident. And another area of common theme between the two is humans are dangerous. You've got to wear a mask because humans are dangerous. You've got to social distance because humans are dangerous. And humans are dangerous because they're destroying the world. So dangerous that some of the extremists in the climate cult, like Dr. Patricia McCormack of Anglia Ruskin University, want humanity to die out and disappear because we're so terrible for the planet. Humans are horrible, dangerous, is a subconscious and conscious theme of both these hoaxes. So you have two hoaxes running to the same line of human control. And they use the same techniques, therefore. Again and again, the climate cult has been exposed for fixing the data on climate and temperature to fit the narrative. And we've seen already how the data is unbelievably fixed with the pandemic to fix and follow the narrative. This is a famous graph of the climate cult called the hockey stick, where we are told to believe that the temperatures were pretty steady all this time, and then only now, whoosh, we're all going to die. And emails were exposed some years ago of how the academics behind that, behind the climate organizations, had conspired together to remove this, the medieval warm period, a period when temperatures were higher than they are now, and at a time when there was no carbon dioxide industry, no cars, none of it. But it put a big question mark onto the narrative. This is happening because of humans. And so it had to go. And by the way, after the medieval warm period, we had the Little Ice Age, when it became extremely cold. These is where the pictures came from of people skating on the Thames when it froze over every winter. And when they say this is the hottest day since records began, many of those records began in the Little Ice Age period, and when we were coming out of it, making comparisons with present day irrelevant. And who has provided many of the computer models that say we're all going to die, and all these extreme measures must be put into place to save the world? Imperial College, home of Neil Ferguson. So, message from the land of sanity. Carbon dioxide is the gas of life. It is plant oxygen, in effect. We breathe it out. They absorb it from the atmosphere. A wonderful symbiosis between humans and nature. But no, it's a demon, because it suits the cult agenda. This is a co-founder of Greenpeace, Patrick Moore, who left the organization because of the way it was going. And he says, and he's far from alone, it's not that we have too much carbon dioxide, we don't have enough. He says plants start to die at 150 parts per million, and even when CO2 fell to 180 parts per million 18 years ago, plants began to starve. This only turned around when the temperature went up. What? CO2 increased only when the temperature went up? What? Because of this. The ocean absorbs carbon dioxide in cool periods, takes it out of the atmosphere, and when the oceans warm, in warm periods, the ocean releases CO2. It's not that CO2 causes temperature, it's that temperature causes CO2 to be released from the ocean. Again, everything is upside down. And the lag time of the release of the ocean, from the ocean as it warms, is 800 years. We go back 800 years from today, you're hitting the medieval warm period. And if you look at the graphs, the CO2 there is in the yellowy orange. It's following, overwhelmingly following temperature rises. Temperature rises are not following rises in CO2. And more goes on. Today, CO2 stands at around 400 parts per million, and plant life is still relatively starved in nutrition, with the optimum levels for plant growth 5 times higher at 2,000 parts per million, and in some periods of the Earth's history, the ratio has reached 4,000 parts per million. And so, as CO2 has increased in the period of the last 100 years or so, the industrial age, the Earth is getting greener. Why wouldn't it? Because the plant life and the natural world is taking more CO2 out of the atmosphere because there's more of it there. And the green movement wants to reverse that. Now, if you followed the propaganda of the climate hoax, you would think, this is a graph of different greenhouse gases, you would think that one was carbon dioxide. Has to be. with all the hysteria. No, no. That is water vapor and clouds. Right up in the 90% of greenhouse gases, water vapor and clouds. This is CO2, and only part of that is caused by humans. The rest is natural. The overwhelming majority is natural. So just like the pandemic hoax, the climate hoax is built on an absolute inversion of the truth. And this guy, William Happer, is an expert in carbon dioxide. He's a professor at Princeton University. And he made an interesting point. He too says, look, hey, it ain't that we got too much CO2. We ain't got enough. And he makes this point. He says, when you paint a wall red, and then you add, say, another coat, second coat of red, it doesn't matter from that point on, basically, how much more red you put on, the wall doesn't look any redder. And he said that's exactly the case with carbon dioxide. This is what he said. I know a lot about CO2 compared with most climate scientists. There's an interesting thing about CO2 which is unique to CO2. It's not true, for example, of water vapor, methane. This is that if you get 1 degree of warming from doubling CO2, so going from, say, 400 parts per million for simplicity to 800, then to get another degree of warming, you have to double 800. You have to go to 1600. So it gets harder and harder to warm. Technically, they call that the logarithmic dependence of temperature rise on CO2 concentration, which is why Happer says that the overwhelming vast majority of warming that a rise in CO2 is going to cause has already happened and happened some time ago. Now, the climate cult, certainly the inner core, know this. And they've had to find a way of getting around it. And so they've come up with the most complex series of feedback loops to just, I look like in Bill Gates' interview, didn't I? Feedback loops to say why, although carbon dioxide works like that in terms of temperature, that actually other feedback loops mean you're going to have runaway global warming. It's all a bloody lie wherever you look. And the reason you'll notice that polar bears are no longer the poster child of the climate cult is because polar bears are thriving. And so why would they hoax human core climate change? Well, because of this. First of all, the United Nations, which is a cult creation, both runs the climate change agenda via its Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. In other words, it controls the narrative of the problem. And it also, through two agendas of the UN, called Agenda 21 and Agenda 30, is driving the solution to the problem. And the solution to the problem through these agendas, I detail them in the books, is to transform human society to save the world from this climate change. And that society of those agendas would look like this. Here we go again. We keep coming back to the same thing. And so through the woke mentality network of 1% controlled and funded organizations, you have the pressure for the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is happening all over the place in America through a woke politician called Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The Green New Deal is the Marxist New Deal. And what it wants is to transform society in exactly the way that is being suggested in Foundation by the pandemic hoax. So people